everyone. I'm here in my kitchen today because I've been asked, since we've been under shutdown and quarantine for COVID, how to do a sourdough starter. So I'm by no means a professional baker. I have worked in a bakery before, so this is kind of how I came to some of my knowledge. I also used to own a catering company, but again, I'm not a professional baker or food maker or anything like that. But I just wanted to share some of the knowledge that I've learned through working in the catering business and at a bakery, and also through my mother and my grandmother, my grandmother was famous for her bread. So I wanted to talk today about some kitchen witch kind of magic. So this is a different kind of magic. It's creating your own yeast. And since we've been in quarantine because of COVID-19, I've found that a lot of people are saying they can't get a hold of yeast. So if you can make your own sourdough starter, you already have yeast. Sourdough starter is very easy to make. It's the maintenance that sometimes people fall down on. So I'm going to give you some tips and tricks and things to do. And I try to make things really easy. If you have seen other recipes, or if you talk to a professional baker, they tend to talk in grams. They're all about the weights and that sort of thing. And yes, absolutely, because sourdough can be a bit of a science. But it doesn't have to necessarily. You don't have to go out and get a kitchen scales and measure everything down to the second kind of thing, or to the gram in this case. But there are some things that you can do. So this is sourdough starter for the home baker. I've made sourdough. Now sourdough is a journey in of itself. First the starter and then the making of the bread. Even professional bakers sometimes have failed sourdough bread. So don't feel like you failed if you made a bad loaf. I make bad loaves all the time where it's like, that wasn't quite right. But it's all about getting to know your starter. So I have my starter here. So there's my starter. I have a lot of it. Now recently I managed to get some starter. So it's easier if you can get some starter and just go from there, a mature start. So my starter that I got was a 10-year-old starter. And starters can go on for years and years and years. They can even be passed down from generation to generation kind of thing. But if you want to start it on your own, they do recommend glass. Mine is in a plastic container because mine's getting large because it will grow. And it'll just keep getting bigger and bigger. And that's why, sometimes you'll have friends that'll say, hey, I have some starter. Do you want some? So if you have a friend that has starter that can give you starter, it makes your journey of making starter so much easier. But here's the glass jar. You're going to need a bigger jar than this once it gets mature, but you can start it out in this kind of glass jar. It is recommended. Now I keep my lid on fairly loose. It's not tight on. You don't want to, this is a mason kind of jar. So you don't want, you can put the lid on definitely, but don't put it on tight. Don't seal it, anything like that, because you can create a bomb in your kitchen and the glass has been known to explode. So that's why I tend to keep it in plastic. So you can keep it in plastic or glass, whichever one you want to do. Sourdough starter is very easy to make. It's water, and I'm using bottled water because it's best to, especially to start out with bottled water, because you want water that's as unchlorinated as possible. So sometimes your tap water might not work if you're in the city kind of thing. So if you can get a couple of bottles of spring water, that's so much the better. And then I use unbleached flour for my present one. You can use rye. You can go into all kinds of different flours. The only flour I wouldn't recommend is all-purpose white flour, because for the most part everything's been bleached out of that flour. So if you're going to use all-purpose, use unbleached all-purpose flour, because there's still something for the starter to grow off of, because there's a bit of a debate out there as to where the yeast comes from. So it's a wild yeast is what you're creating. So there is yeast in the air. We breathe it in all day long, every day kind of thing. There's yeast around flowers, because my mother used to do starter, and she would put it beside certain flowers to try and pick up on that essence and that kind of yeast. So some say it's from the air, some say it's from the flour. I think it's probably a little bit of both, but who knows, kind of thing. It's all in the magic, right? So I'm going to get out my cup here. So this is my half cup measure cup. Now for the first day, for day one, you're going to want to put in 1 cup of flour. So 1 cup of flour, that's what I'm putting in here. 1 cup of flour, so I'm starting a new starter, I guess. 1 cup of flour. And like I said, you know, it's sort of it's not a pure measurement as far as grams and stuff go. And then my jar of chopsticks here all ready. And then you're going to take your water and you're going to put a little less, well, about 1 cup in there. So it's a 1-to-1 kind of ratio. So 1 cup into, I'm going to tip this down maybe a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. So 1 cup water, 1 cup flour. I take my chopstick. This is where you can use all those chopsticks that maybe you've been saving. And you mix it up. Now for day one, you might want to add a little more water, but normally it's a 1-to-1. Just eyeball it a little bit. If it wants more water, you can give it more water. And you mix it up. I'm going to give it just a smidge more. Just a little bit. Okay, so I've mixed it all up. Make sure it's well incorporated, the water and the flour. There it is in there. It's just water and flour mixed together. Really easy. And then you'll put a little bit of a lid on this, nothing tight, nothing tight. So if you have one of these, you know, kind of seal ones, just put it on real loose. Real loose. Nothing, no, don't put the ring on this time. Just put it on real loose, and then you let it sit for 24 hours. So it's just going to sit there for 24 hours. That's day one. So mark it on your calendar, put a little thing there saying it's day one. This starter that I've got, and I'm going to see if I can show you what it looks like on the inside. Can you see it? So there's bubbles in there. And it smells a little like beer because that's essentially what it is. It's yeast that we're using, right? So it's yeast that we're using. So it's going to smell like, it's going to smell vinegary, maybe a little tarty, tangy is another word that a lot of people use. It can smell like, you know, unbaked bread kind of thing. So this is on about day, I can't remember. It's been a while that I've had it, but now I keep it on the counter because I do bake fairly often, especially now that we're in quarantine. So I've been baking more and more. So before that, I kept it in the fridge, and you can keep it in the fridge. When you're first starting the starter, it's going to be a 7-day process. So you want to keep it out on the counter is probably best because you want to feed it once a day. So that first day one, this one over here, I'm going to check on it again in about 24 hours and feed it again. This one I do feed every day because it is out on my counter, and the ratio for once you get further in is 1/2 cup of flour to 1/2 cup of water, and that's what I've been feeding it, and it's been glorious and it's been happy. And it's been bubbling up and all that kind of stuff. So day 2, that's when you take some of this starter and you're going to pour out about 1/2 cup of it. And you're going to do that for the first 7 days. And a lot of people feel like that's a waste, like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? But there is a method to our madness when we do that. One, because your starter is going to grow. And like I said, I'm in a bigger container now, and like once I feed this today, it'll bubble right up to here, right? So, and if I'm not baking, then I have a lot more starter, so it gets a little bit more. So I'm actually going to bake off some of my starter today. I'm not going to make bread. I'm going to do another video where I make bread. But you can, from day one, use the discarded part if you want. For day one and day two and day three, you might want to make pancakes with it. You might want to just fry it up kind of thing. It's only about day four that you want to start frying it as fried bread. So I'm going to put the oven on. I've got my cast iron frying pan here. I've got a little butter in my frying pan. So I'll bring you guys down here. So a little butter in my frying pan. I thought maybe, depending on how much starter I have, yeah, I have enough, that I'm going to make a savory one and a sweet one. I'll start with the sweet one because the savory one has garlic and garlic tends to overtake things. So I'm going to do a sweet one first. And what it simply is simply fried bread. And you can do this with your starter, but once you get to day 7, so you want to feed it every day around the same time. So it's about 5 o'clock right now when I'm doing this. So around 5, I want to do this starter tomorrow. And around 5, I'll probably do this starter as well. I tend to do my starter at the end of the day. It doesn't take very long. It's about 5 minutes to feed it. Like I said, half a cup of flour, half a cup of water. Once you're beyond day 1. Day 1, you start with the 1 cup of flour and a little more than a cup of water. And you're going to come back to it, and depending on how warm your kitchen is, it might start bubbling already. If it doesn't, that's okay. It takes time, so it's sort of a trust in the process kind of thing. When you come back, you might actually see some liquid on top, and it can be sort of an amber to a dark brown color. That's okay, just pour it off. That part of your starter is called hooch. It is alcohol, because that's what this is doing, is it's fermenting. Sourdough bread is so healthy for you because it is a fermented bread. It's also much easier for your body to digest, and there's a lot of natural minerals and vitamins in it, like vitamins B and that sort of thing, and your body does tend to digest it very well and much easier. So sourdough bread can be much better for you overall as well. So my butter is starting to fry up here. So I've got my butter, which is awesome. Now my little spatula, just to kind of move this around. I'm going to put my fan on a little bit because my fire alarm tends to be really sensitive to anything. So you can see I'm taking a little cup out of my starter, and I'm just going to pour it right in here, just like this. And I'm going to let it fry up. And it's actually really, really good this way too. If you feeling lazy, you don't want to do anything with your discarded. You can just throw it out too. A lot of people feel like, oh my God, I don't want to discard just throw out my discarded part. That's okay. After day 7, you don't have to do that anymore. After day 7, well, it depends, right? Again, it depends on where you are in the world, what your kitchen's like, that sort of thing. Did I get it? Oh, I did. Okay, so depending on, and you can see this is cooking up here nice, really nice. And I'm going to flip it over. And basically, like I said, it's fried bread. So I'm going to do the sweet one first. So I got a little brown sugar here. So I'm going to sprinkle it with a little bit of brown sugar. So that'll melt nice on the fried bread, basically. And you can do all kinds of different concoctions depending on what you like. And like I said, it can be sweet or savory. A little bit of cinnamon on there. It's frying up nice. Let it soak in all that good butter, because we'll put more butter in for the savory one. Just going to flip it over real quick. Get a little more sugar on here so it's on both sides. A little more cinnamon. Oh yeah, that's nice. It is nicely caramelized. So Just gonna scrape out the sugar. So we don't want that for our savory one. Let the pan cool off a bit. So like I say, by day 7 you should have a mature starter if you're feeding it every day. You do need to feed it once a day for the first 7 days. If you don't have it all bubbling up and active, because I'm not sure if you can see here, there's bubbles right there. See those bubbles? You're looking for that. That means it's alive, and it is a living entity, so you need to feed it every day. If after the 7th day it isn't quite like bubbly and rising up, you should see it rising up and whatnot, keep going. And like I said, trust in the process, because it just kind of depends on the timing, the warmth of your kitchen, that sort of thing. Now, because I'm cooking right beside this one right here that it's getting a little extra heat right now, I don't recommend putting it in direct sunlight. Do not do that. So there's a couple of things that can kill yeast. Heat is one of them. So you want to be mindful of how hot your kitchen gets. Not feeding it. You can starve your starter as well. I have done that. I'm guilty of that. So you have to watch and just make sure. Now, after the 7th, 8th, 9th day, depending on when your starter kind of comes alive and is mature, and what you're doing by taking that discard out is you're taking out the extra that the mature stuff on the bottom doesn't really need, so that when you're putting the new feed back in, it can process off the yeast, off all that flour that you're putting in, so that it's able to kind of keep growing. If you don't discard from it, then you're sort of impeding its growth, and that can be part of the reason why a starter doesn't start. A lot of people will be like, well, I tried to start a starter, but it just didn't go. And the first thing I often ask is, did you discard part of it every time you went to feed it for the first 7 to 9, 10 days kind of thing? If you didn't, then you're slowing the growth down, and you'll find that the starter doesn't quite go for you. And that can be part of the reason why it didn't go. The other reason is people often will use all-purpose flour. It tends to not go when you do that as well. So like I said, after the 7th day, you can feed it every day, every 24 hours. Some chefs will recommend twice a day. You can do that if you want. Once a day is just fine. I'm very low maintenance, kind of. I don't like a lot of extra work if I don't have to do it. So I just feed mine once a day, and if I am not going to be baking, then I tend to put it in the fridge. And if you put it in the fridge, then you really only have to feed it about twice a week. Twice a week is good for it if you've got it in the fridge. And what the fridge does is it just slows down the way the yeast ferments. It slows the fermentation down a little bit so that it's not all bubbling up and looking for more, because it will look for more food if you leave it out, if you're letting it get warm. If you want to bake with it after the 7th or 10th day, depending on how it works out for you, I'm going to turn this down just a little bit, then, what was I saying? If you're, then take it out about 24 hours before you're going to bake. So let's say you're going to bake on a Saturday, take it out Friday morning so it's sitting on the counter for a while. Also take it out a couple of hours before you feed it so it can kind of get to a room temperature. Let it go, feed it, and then put it back a couple of hours afterwards. If it's, 4 hours or 5 hours or whatever after that, that's okay too. It's actually pretty lenient, more lenient than most people think. Some people think sourdough is a real maintenance thing. I'm like, it's less effort than brushing your teeth every day and every night. So, yeah, it's easy to do. So I just added some salt and pepper. I'm putting some garlic on here. Some Epicure garlic for my Epicure friends there. See, I got Epicure roasted garlic. Yummy, yummy. And then I keep, green onions growing in my kitchen. So they're always here for me. So I'm going to put some green onions on here. fry up and to get onto the bread. Really easy peasy. I'll leave these back so that I can put them on. And this is almost done. Like I said, this is a great idea for your discard dough after the third day. I always keep salt in a container like this. This is a great way to use those classical lids because they fit on those little jars, actually any mason jar, really well. Oops, that lid wasn't quite on. And I'm a pincher of salt because you're going to find out why, because when I make the sourdough bread, which is going to be my next video, you'll find out why. Oh, this smells amazing. So this is just a nice little snack to whip up, especially if you don't, like I said, you can make, after the third day, you can make waffles, you can make donuts. There's all kinds of stuff you can do with the discarded part of the sourdough if you don't want to throw it out. But if you're just looking for something quick and fast and easy, you can just fry it up like nice fried bread, because that's essentially what it is. And this one's cooled down enough that I can cut it. So I'm going to cut this. See it caramelized really nice? Oh, it's really good. This is the sweet one. So good. Savory one will be my lunch. Yes, I'm having a late lunch. So that's basically the basics of sourdough. So day one, you start with a jar, 1 cup of flour, not all purpose, anything but. If you're using whole wheat, you can use a whole cup of whole wheat. You could start with a whole cup of rye if you want to make it rye, and then a little more than a cup of water. Day two, you're going to sort of do half and half. So you're going to do, if you do half a cup, you're going to do a 1/4 cup of rye and a 1/4 cup of unbleached all-purpose flour, because otherwise you'll get a very heavy starter and it'll make for very heavy brick-like bread. So it's always good to mix it with all-purpose after that. The first day you can do the straight up rye or whole wheat or whatever kind of thing. Right now mine are both all-purpose, so I've been just using the non-bleached or the unbleached all-purpose flour. So 1 cup the first day and a little more than a cup on the first day. Leave it for 24 hours, come back to it, discard out a half a cup, about half a cup, and then add in half a cup of flour, half a cup of water, and it's a 1-to-1 ratio. And you do that for 7 to 10 days. And like I said, it depends on your kitchen whether it develops as quickly as 7 days. If it doesn't, don't lose hope, just keep going. If you happen to starve it, you can bring it back most of the time. It might get a dry crust on it that you kind of have to break through, but you can usually bring it back. So don't be afraid if, oh, I missed a day or whatever. I mean, the first stages are very important, so do try to do that every 24 hours. Like I said, if there's an amber or even to dark brown liquid on top, you just pour that out. That's called hooch. That is the alcohol that is coming from the process of fermenting, the fermentation process that's happening inside your jar. And if it's ever pink or orange, you have bad starter, so throw it out, and you have to throw out the whole batch if you ever see pink or orange. But don't be put off by the smell, because sometimes the smell can be a little like, whoa, what is that? Right now mine smells like nice beer, but when it's first starting, sometimes it can go anywhere from, you know, dirty socks to vinegar to a really tangy kind of fruit taste or smell. But once it gets mature, it tends to stay into that yeast kind of smell, that bakery smell. But don't be afraid of it fluctuating. If it smells bad, that's okay, because it's got to have a sour taste or sour smell to it. That's the reason sourdough, right? So I'm going to get more into how to make actual sourdough bread once you have a starter that's started. You cannot make bread with your starter until it's mature, and that takes 7 to 10 days. And the taste and the seasoning, the flavor of your sourdough will get better with age. And like I said, you can have this for years. The starter that I got from someone was a professional baker, and you can go to bakeries and see if they have a starter. Most bakeries will happily give you a little bit of starter, and it does give you sort of a fast step process into making your own starter, because you're starting with a baseline. You're not just starting with flour and water kind of thing. And the one that I got not too long ago was 10 years old. So my starter's fairly old. And you can just go from there. It's wild yeast. It never goes bad. It doesn't really ever go bad as long as you take care of it and you're not putting it in silly places like on top of heaters and things like that. But you can have it for 10, 20, 30 years kind of thing, easy. And you can keep it in your fridge if you want to. You can even put it in your freezer if you know I'm not going to be baking much over the next 6 months or whatever. If you're a snowbird or something like that, you can put it in a sealed container and put it in your freezer for up to 1 year. That's the only time you would put starter in a sealed container, by the way. Otherwise, don't put it in like a super sealed container. Loose lids are always good when it comes to starter. Otherwise, you can create a bomb in your own kitchen. So I hope that helped with the beginnings of how to get your starter going. And I will follow this up with how to make your own sourdough bread. It is the most ancient way to make bread, and you're making it from wild yeast. That's what you're creating when you create that sourdough starter. It's how mankind first started making bread, was with sourdough starters. And it's all natural, and like I said, it's very beneficial health-wise. It's good for your gut. It's easily digestible. It helps with the flora in your gut and that sort of thing as well. So it's definitely to your benefit. If you make it with rye, it's actually really good for diabetics. It helps to bring their blood sugars to a more even keel, that sort of thing. There's lots of health benefits. So there's lots of good reasons why you want starter. Even if you don't use it all the time, at least have it in your fridge, feed it a couple times a week. It's so worth it. And then when things like this happen, where there's a shortage of yeast, where people can't get yeast, you always have yeast. You will always have yeast. You always have a leavener for your bread. So you'll be able to make all kinds of things. And there are all kinds of things you can make with your sourdough bread or your sourdough starter. All right, so I'll be back with the bread recipe.